Reflections on the Good News of Jesus Christ for the 14th Sunday of Ordinary Time from the Gospel of Mark. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, and he stayed close to the sea. One of the synagogue officials, named Jairus, came forward. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, saying, "My daughter is at the point of death. Please come lay your hands on her so that she may get well and live." Jesus went off with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed upon him. There was a woman afflicted with hemorrhages for 12 years. She had suffered greatly at the hands of many doctors and had spent all that she had. Yet she was not helped, but only grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. She said, "If I but touch his clothes, I shall be cured." Immediately, her flow of blood dried up. She felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Jesus, aware at once that power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who has touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to Jesus, "You see how the crowd is pressing upon you, and yet you asked, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. The woman, realizing what had happened to her, approached in fear and trembling. She fell down before Jesus and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be cured of your affliction." While he was still speaking, people from the synagogue official's house arrived and said, "Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any longer?" Disregarding the message that was reported, Jesus said to the synagogue official, "Do not be afraid. Just have faith." He did not allow anyone to accompany him inside except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they arrived at the house of the synagogue official, he caught sight of a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. So he went in and said to them, "Why this commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep." And they ridiculed him. Then he put them all out. He took along the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and entered the room where the child was. He took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." The girl, a child of 12, arose immediately and walked around. At that they were utterly astounded. He gave strict orders that no one should know this, and that she should be given something to eat. The good news of the Lord. One of the great, universal, and frankly painful effects of the recent pandemic is that we were all out of touch. Quite literally, out of touch. In the early days of COVID, we were warned against touching anything that had not first been swabbed with disinfectant. And all through those long months, we were cautioned about touching one another. No shaking hands, no embracing, quite simply, no touching. Lives depended on it. One of the great blessings then came on the day when restrictions were lifted, and we could finally, as the advertising phrase puts it, reach out and touch someone without worrying that we may be giving or receiving the kiss of death. Once again, we could keep in touch, stay in touch, be in touch. Such actions can spell the difference between keeping or losing a friendship. But more, this basic human act is critical for life itself. A child who is not touched lovingly and frequently can die from lack of touch. Skin hunger, the physiological need that all humans of any age have for human touch and interaction, became a notable topic of articles in various journals during the time of pandemic. Of course, this is not a new discovery. Jesus obviously knew something about the power of touch. Today's gospel provides two of many times when his touch brought healing, health, and wholeness to broken lives. Jairus is a leader of the local synagogue and therefore an important man in the community. It is a major move, then, for him to come forward and plead for Jesus to come and put his hands on his dying 12-year-old daughter that she may get well and live, as he said. His love for his daughter and his trust in Jesus' touch are powerful. But then along comes a woman with a hemorrhage problem that has lasted as many years as Jairus' daughter has lived. Her problems are multiple. Not only is she broke from the cost of ineffective medical treatment, not only has she suffered greatly at the hands of those many doctors, she lives in a culture where having a flow of blood renders her ritually unclean. It makes her a social leper. She is convinced that merely touching Jesus' clothing will heal or save her. She steps forward and does it, and her flow of blood dries up immediately. Then Jesus turns, and what had been a rather impersonal, secretive contact, the woman renders personal by approaching Jesus in fear and trembling and telling him the whole truth. She was not really afraid of Jesus. She was afraid because she should not have been there at all. And that is why she had not approached him openly in the first place. In that culture, her bleeding made her unclean. And if the people around had known about it, she would have been in deep trouble. Like many of those in recent time with HIV/AIDS, she had to remain in hiding. She was, of course, no threat to anyone, but fear does not know reason. Now her secret is going to be exposed. No wonder she is even more afraid. But she steps forward, falls at Jesus' feet, and tells him everything. There is no anger or indignation on Jesus' part. Daughter, he says kindly, your faith has restored you to health. Go in peace and be free from your complaint. Jesus, whom we know as the resurrection and the life, has restored her to fullness of life. Not only is she physically cured, she is socially cured, fully restored to a normal social life and able to be reintegrated into her society. She is a whole person in every sense, individually and socially. But it was her deep faith in Jesus, symbolized by her mere touching the hem of his garment, which was a major factor in her healing. Meanwhile, when people come from Jairus' house to tell him that his daughter has died and that he should stop bothering the teacher, Jesus invites him to a still deeper faith. Jairus has already shared the hemorrhaging woman's faith that touching and being touched by Jesus could heal. Now he is invited to believe that Jesus' touch can overcome death itself. And it happens. Jesus says the words which we need to hear him say often in our lives. Do not be afraid, only have faith. Someone has said that the phrase, do not be afraid, appears in the Bible more than 365 times, enough for one a day, because we need to hear it at least once a day. He only allows 3 of his disciples, the inner circle of Peter, James, and John, to accompany him. He wants them to see what is going to happen, but he does not want to satisfy the mere curiosity of the excitable and sensational crowd. At the house, the people laughed at him. They knew a dead person when they saw one. Now, was the girl in fact dead, or was she in a death-like state of unconsciousness, like a coma? It does not really matter, because as far as those present were concerned, she was dead. If Jesus had not been there, she would very likely have been buried within a few hours. Jesus goes into the house with just the parents and his 3 close companions. He takes the girl by the hands and says to her, "Little girl, I tell you to get up." And the 12-year-old girl immediately got up and walked around quite normally, as if nothing had been wrong with her. Whether she was dead or in a coma, she was restored to fullness of life, and Jesus is revealed as the Lord of life. No wonder that those who witnessed the scene were overcome with astonishment, as the gospel says, so much so that they had to be reminded by Jesus to give the girl something to eat. This is a small touch on Jesus's part, but it reveals how other-centered and caring he is. He could have been basking in the admiration of the onlookers, but he continues to focus on the girl and her needs. But perhaps Jairus is not so unlike us. After all, what will we not do for our children or grandchildren? What dragon will we not slay to protect them? What chasm will we not cross to bring them to the promised land? For many moms and dads, their joys and dreams are inextricably linked to their children's. Jairus, in today's gospel, is just such a dad. To save his beloved daughter, Jairus does not hesitate to risk his standing in the community and his career to approach this controversial rabbi who is reputed to work wonders. A parent's complete and unconditional love is the very reflection of the love of God in our midst. When a parent or friend, a neighbor or mentor, how can we mirror that same love in our own generosity of heart, in our own resolve to lift up the fallen, to bring healing to the suffering, to restore life to the dead? Both of these stories reveal Jesus as the source of life and healing. We have been made, the Book of Wisdom tells us, to be in the image of God's own nature. This is the goal of our lives, to know, to love, and to share his life forever, beginning now. Yet all of us, in some way or another, are constantly in need of God's healing. Healing, health, wholeness, and holiness are, in English, all derived from the same word. We pray for healing, which will give us health in every aspect of our lives. Yes, in our bodies, but not just there. The realization of full health is to become a whole person, where every part of me, spiritual, intellectual, social, psychological, physiological, and so forth, every part of me functions as it ought and in perfect harmony within itself, with others, and with the environment. Of course, this is not just for us as isolated individuals. Yes, the temptation is always that life can be so much easier and safer when we have nothing to do with others. Don't get involved, walk away, mind your own business. Those are much safer approaches to life. But in today's gospel, Jesus does not hesitate to wade into the messiness of life in order to transform such messiness into healing, such death into life. In these two miracles, Jesus ignores custom and taboo in ways that we modern readers might miss. In taking the dead girl by the hand, in allowing the sick woman to touch him, Jesus became ritually unclean and therefore not permitted to enter the synagogue or the temple. But to respond compassionately to the plight of these families became more important, more sacred than the safety of convention or tradition. Are we willing to imitate that same compassion of the healing Christ? Are we willing to risk our own sense of safety and satisfaction in order to bring that love into the lives of others? Perhaps you are suffering right now, burning with anger at someone who has hurt you, or unable to forgive an old hurt, or you are a bit depressed, or just worn down by the burdens and challenges of life. Follow the example of the woman in today's gospel. Bring your pain to Jesus in prayer. For God, no situation in life is beyond hope. To quote Pope Francis, let us not close our hearts. Let us not lose confidence. Let us never give up. There are no situations that God cannot change. Thanks for listening.